Auzu billahi minash shaitani rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. We start with verse 39 of Surah Yusuf. It says, "O my fellow inmates, tell me, what is better, many different lords or one Allah, the irresistible?" Now look at how Yusuf alayhi salam addresses them. "O my companions." He calls them my companions. You can see how can they be his companions. He is a prophet of Allah, one of the most pious beings on earth, and they are the worst of humanity, evil people. Again, this is a technique of dawah, that you form a bonding with the other party. You come at their level. He doesn't start his speech with a negative or a hostile approach that, "Oh, you sinful people, you are suffering in here because of your evilness, and so give up those ways and, turn to goodness." This is indeed a very negative approach, because the person on whom dawah is being done, he gets offended, he gets defensive, and he gets so busy defending himself that he absorbs nothing. Now, after forming that bond, he strikes at their rationality. He says, is having one master better, or having a group of master, is that better? Imagine a group which has to obey the command and please just one master, and the other group that has to obey 10 masters. Now, even common sense says that obeying 10 masters is obviously difficult. And what about, those 10 masters, that obeying and pleasing one is, very, very easy. And when there are 10 masters and you are obeying them, if you try to please one of them or two of them, you will disassociate from the others and they will get displeased. And your struggle would be maybe more, but the result would be nil. Whereas pleasing and obeying one master is simple, it's easy. And in his wisdom, Yusuf alayhi salam uses the attribute of Allah that are most appropriate at this time. Al-Wahid, the one, the only, because he has no associate, he has no partner. And Al-Qahar, meaning that no other power has the power to subdue the power of Allah or to go against Allah. It shows the ultimate control of Allah over everything. Now, what Yusuf alayhi salam is trying to teach them in a subtle way is that look at everything around you. It's working in perfect harmony and discipline. This would not have been the case if there were multiple gods. This one fact alone shows that there is only one master. There is only one God whose will is executed. And the main essence of all pagan religions is that they have a variety of gods who keep bickering and fighting against one another. So he invites them to use reasoning and intellect. That can the world be in order if that was the case? Our religion is such a moderate and balanced religion that it doesn't ask for blind following, but brings in reason, it brings in logic. When we go through the Quran so many times, in fact, over and over again, we are asked to ponder, to reflect, to rationalize. And we find that Islam is the only religion which has given pondering over the universe the status of the most supreme form of worship. Why so much emphasis on the use of brains and developing the thought process? Because this builds, boosts, and nurtures Iman. Yusuf alayhi salam doesn't say that people do as I say because I am a prophet of Allah, but he takes pains to explain things to them. Verse 40, Those you serve besides him are nothing but mere names which you and your forefathers have invented, for which Allah has revealed no sanction. The command belongs to none but Allah, who has commanded that you worship none but Him. That is the true faith, yet most of the people do not know. Now Yusuf alayhi salam explains to these people the reality of their gods, that these are just idols, and everyone knows the source of idols. Man makes them with his own hands, and then they are given names. Then Yusuf alayhi salam tries to tell them that if you have not given them these names, then surely one of your forefathers, one of your ancestors have given these names to them, and you are following. And again, this is a very rational approach. How do you prove the authenticity of anything, of any concept, of any ideology? By tracing back to its source. So, he teaches them to reflect upon the source. He teaches them that these are just figments of your imagination. Now, after this, he says, the command belongs to none but Allah, meaning that only Allah has the authority to tell what is right, what is wrong, what is forbidden, what is allowed. And He has not designated this authority to anyone else. And it is His command that you worship none but Him. So if the ultimate and the final authority has decided this, then no one has the power to change this command. Then the end of the verse says, وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Yet most of the people do not know. Most of the people get misled. They do not perceive this reality. And even within the Muslim community, we see shades of this kind of shirk. Haven't they given name to pious human beings which can be attributed only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What name is given to Hazrat Ali raziyallahu ta'ala anhu? Mushkil Kusha, the one who has the power to resolve problems. What name has been given to Ali Hajweri rahimullah, Data Ganjbakhsh, the giver of treasures? It's the people who gave these titles to them. And then Yusuf alayhi salam says, Zalika Dinul Qayyam, that this is the true faith, that you worship none but Allah. Now just analyze the beautiful way of dawah of Yusuf alayhi salam. He categorically and step by step, he is preparing them for Tawheed. And how he introduced Allah in a subtle, in a rational way, wherever he needed to strike at their emotions, he did that by coming to their level, by calling them my companions. And whenever he needed to strike at their logic, he did that by rationally explaining the oneness of Allah. And now after building up to this level, he says that people, number one, do not worship anyone but Allah. And number two, that this is the absolute straight way of life. So he comes to the crux of the matter. Now the very disastrous mistake in dawah is that you start with the do's and don'ts. This is wrong, this is haram, this is not allowed. By this attitude, people are put off and they run away from deen. Of course, you cannot make haram halal to please someone, but the first step is to inculcate, to instigate and provoke the love of Allah, and then gradually bring in the laws. This is the way dawah is done in the best possible ways. Verse 41, O my fellow inmates, one of you will be released and serve wine to your Lord, and the other will be crucified, and the birds will eat from his head. That's how your cases will be decided concerning which you inquired. Now again he addresses them with love. O my two companions. Now he comes to their point of interest and tells them about the interpretation of dreams, that one of them will be released and serve wine to the king of Egypt, and one will be crucified and birds would eat up his body from the head. Now, this is a very sensitive issue because he cannot lie and he does not want to hurt the feelings of the one who was to be crucified. So he doesn't specify which one will be hanged and which one will serve wine. He tells the fact, but as gently as he can. And this is again the mark of a moment. Neither is he lying, nor is he too blunt about it. Verse 42. Then to the one who he thought would be released, he said, mention me to your Lord. But Shaitan made him forget to mention to his Lord. So he remained in the prison a few more years. Now, he addressed the one whom he thought is to be released. That mention me to your Lord, meaning that talk to your king about me. Tell him that I have a false charge against me. So get me released, get me out as soon as possible. And then the verse says that Shaitan made him forget to mention to his Lord. Now, two interpretations have been given to this. The first one says that when this lad was transferred to the king's palace, he forgot to mention Yusuf alayhi salam to the king. And the second one says that Shaitan made Yusuf alayhi salam forget his Lord and he made an appeal to a human being instead of him. And for this he was punished and had to stay in the jail for more years. Now, which of these interpretations is correct? The first one, because there is nothing wrong in asking help from a qualified person. It's not wrong to defend yourself and adopt permissible and legitimate means, and there is nothing wrong with that. Now, the verse says that Shaitan made the person forget to mention Yusuf alayhi salam to the king. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to acknowledge and show gratefulness to the one who has benefited us in a way or in any way that we can, and to forget is showing ungratefulness. And just look at the ingratitude of this person, that he forgot the person who was his mentor in the gloomy days of the prison. Now just bring to your mind how Yusuf alayhi salam must have felt at that time. That suffocating feeling that there is no one outside who knows about me. In fact, no one is interested in me. No one cares enough for me. And this betrayal and ingratitude has become so frequent to him. First, it was his brothers, whom he loved, whom he trusted so much. Then the man who gave him shelter and was talking about making him his son, and whom Yusuf alayhi salam served with such devotion. When it comes to his own corrupt wife, he ruthlessly shoves him into the prison. And this man in the jail with whom he did dawah with such sincerity and purity of intention, he just conveniently forgets all about him. Why was this happening to him? Because Allah has His own plans. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses someone for Himself exclusively, He cuts all the strings of reliance on anyone in dunya. All the dependencies start shattering one by one, and he is left with no one but Allah. And this is the part of the training of what was coming up ahead. Just have a look at all the phases of his life. The years he spent with the father were years of his moral and spiritual training. Years of his life in the minister's house were years of his worldly training, and his training of gaining insight into the various shades of human nature, and this time of his life in the prison to make him a strong person and to give him time to think and ponder and spend time with Allah alone. Now he is being processed and groomed and shaped by divine power into a leader. And never even once do we find that he's upset or depressed or pessimistic. Rather, he's always brimming over with shukr. Why? Because he has the peace of mind, this satisfaction that he has Allah with him. Even if no one in the whole world cares about him, he knows that Allah cares about him. Verse 43. One day the king of Egypt said, I saw 7 fat cows in my dream, which were eaten up by 7 lean cows. Likewise, I saw 7 green ears of corn and 7 others that dried up. O chiefs, tell me the meaning of my dream if you can interpret dreams. Verse 44. They replied, confused nightmares. We are not skilled in the interpretation of dreams. So the king wakes up one day and says that I saw a very unusual dream. And the dream, as he narrated, was that there are 7 fat cows and 7 lean ones. And the lean ones eat up the fat ones. And he also saw 7 green ears of corn and 7 ears of dried corn. And he wants to know about the interpretation. But people respond to him in a very casual and a very simple way and say that this was just messed up thoughts which actually meant nothing. And probably they said this because they were not familiar with the art of interpreting dreams, and they admit it as well. Verse 45. Thereupon one of the 2 inmates who were released remembered Yusuf after all that time, and he said, I will tell you its interpretation. Just send me to Yusuf in the prison. Now, after all this, that people refused to give any meaning to the dream, one of the young men who were in the prison with Yusuf alayhi salam, and to whom Yusuf alayhi salam had said that convey my case to the king, he suddenly remembers Yusuf alayhi salam. Now we have been told in verse 42 that after the 2 lads left the prison, Yusuf alayhi salam stayed in the prison for Bida Sinin. Bida Sinin is a time period between 3 to 9 years. So nearly a decade has passed, and now he remembers Yusuf alayhi salam. And he says to the king that just give me some time off my duty and send me to the prison where Yusuf is, and then I will tell you the interpretation of your dream. Now just look at the selfish and shallow nature of this man. He doesn't say that I will ask Yusuf about the interpretation and that he's gifted with this art and that he's going to tell us. It seems that he wants to get the credit of interpretation himself, and then maybe he asks a favor in return from the king. And he had forgotten all about the favors of Yusuf alayhi salam. And now that the need arose, he remembered him again. And even now he is so selfish that he does not ask of the favor which Yusuf alayhi salam had asked from him. And he says nothing about his unlawful imprisonment. This is how selfish and fickle human nature can get. Our religion condemns this kind of ungratefulness. Favors are to be remembered and mentioned if possible, and returned as well. That is why it is said in a hadith that whoever is not thankful to his fellow men, he is not thankful to Allah. Why? Because when a believer recognizes someone's favor, he also has the vision to see that who was actually behind this favor. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who favored him by putting into the heart of one of his slaves to give that favor to him. And recognizing favors is a trait that has to be enhanced. It has to be nurtured consciously. Otherwise, the evil within man subdues it. And as we are told in this surah, that this is a trap of shaitan. He doesn't want this quality to get built. That is why he makes people forget favors which other people incur upon him. And this is the reason that when we are in a fix, in a problem, we beg before Allah, we cry before Him, and when He takes us out, we forget all about it. At one place in the Quran, Allah says, describing such people, that it seems as if they never asked and I never gave. So the lesson for us is that consciously think about the favors of Allah upon us and thank Him of the favors of our fellow beings as well, and thank them as well. What does Allah teach us in the Quran? Thank me and thank them. This is regarding our parents. Then we are told in a hadith that once the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam advised the women to give more sadaqah, and when it was inquired why, he said that when he went on Miraj, he saw more of women in hell. He was asked the reason for that, and he said that this is because most of them are ungrateful to their husbands. Even if they receive favors for years and years, on one small discomfort, they say that, what have I received in your house? Now, these are not the literal words of the hadith, but this is the gist of it. And ungratefulness to Allah is also called kufr, because one of the meanings of kufr is ungratefulness. Verse 46. He came to Yusuf in the prison and said, O Yusuf, the truthful one, tell us the meaning of the dream of 7 fat cows which are eaten up by 7 lean ones, and of 7 green ears of corn and 7 other dried up, so that I may return to the people and let them know the meaning of this dream. Verse 47, he replied, you will cultivate for 7 consecutive years. During this time, you should leave the corn you reap in the ear, except what may be sufficient for your food. Verse 48, then after that period, there will come upon you 7 hard years, which will eat away all that you have stored, except a little, which you may have specifically set aside. Verse 49, after that period will come a year of abundant rain, in which the people will squeeze the juice. Now, in all these verses, 46, 47, 48 and 49, this makes it 4, in these 4 verses. This person comes to the prison and calls Yusuf alayhi salam Siddiq, the most truthful one. It seems that he's kind of flattering Yusuf alayhi salam. He doesn't even inquire out of courtesy's sake that, how are you? Or he wasn't apologetic that, I forgot about you. He just comes to his point directly that, come on, tell me the interpretation of this specific dream. Again, we see colors of selfish nature and self-centeredness. Yusuf alayhi salam immediately gives the interpretation that you will cultivate for 7 years, and corn that you reap, leave them in the ears, do not take them out, keep them safe, and only use that much which is actually needed. Do not let it go waste and keep it safe, because after that you will see 7 years of famine, and during these hard years, use the grain that you had saved, and after these tough 7 years, a year will come that will have abundant rain. So much so that the grapevines will flourish and you will squeeze them. Now, the points that we learn from these verses is primarily the extraordinary patience of Yusuf alayhi salam. He does not say that you forget me. He does not say that you forgot me. Why have you come to me now asking me interpretation of these dreams? He's not saying that, just get lost now. Not a single word of complaint. And he gives the interpretation with sincerity. Even the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that I am amazed at the patience of Yusuf. When the man came back to him, I would not have given him that information until I put a condition that they release me. Now, if Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying this, then at what place are people like us? And secondly, something even more amazing is the fact that he is not just giving them interpretations, but the solutions to the coming situation as well. And this is the gentleness and kind nature at its peak. He is so selfless that he is still concentrating on the good he can do for humanity. And the last bit that he adds, that you will get a year of abundant rain after the drought. Now we see that there was no indication of that in the dream, but Yusuf alayhi salam tells them this due to his deep insight and wisdom, because to cover up for a drought of 7 years, an abundant rain just has to come. Verse 50, the king said, "Bring this man to me." When the messenger came to Yusuf, he said, "Go back to your lord and ask him about the case of those women who cut their hands. Indeed, my Rabb has full knowledge of their snare." Now, the person whom the king had sent to find out about the interpretation of his dream comes back to the king and informs him about it, and obviously he must have asked about the source of his knowledge, and thus the king comes to know about Yusuf alayhi salam. And this is one of the beauties of the Quran, that details that are understood are not given in it. Now this man goes back to Yusuf alayhi salam and tells him that the king has asked for him. Now the reaction of Yusuf alayhi salam is truly amazing. Just imagine that he had been in the prison for so many years, and how desperate he must have been to get released. And now, when out of the blues this man comes, it's like a dream come true. And any other person in his place would have rushed out of excitement. But Yusuf alayhi salam's reaction is very composed as usual. And instead of hurrying out, he says that first go and ask your king to get the matter clarified of the women who cut their hands. And everyone more or less knew about this story, knew about this incident of the past, because it was a well-known one and it was like the talk of the town. And he has so much command over his emotions, over his speech, that he doesn't use any indecent words about those women. For example, he could have said to find out about those vulgar women, or those corrupt women, or those shameless women who were after me. He uses the most decent words to recall them back into memory. The women who cut their hands. And this is again one of the very prominent marks of a moment. Controlled emotions, controlled speech. Now, why did Yusuf alayhi salam take this step? Number one, that whatever the prophets do, they are guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it was divine guidance, firstly. And secondly, he had the great mission of dawah and tabligh. A pagan nation was, against whom he had to do the dawah. And this was a duty that was important to him more than anything else in his life. And in order to carry out this mission, he first had to clarify his position and defend his reputation, which was at stake. Because if he would have come out with this mark on his reputation, this blemish on his reputation, people would have laughed at him when he would have preached. So, in other words, he was so committed to his mission that it was more important to him than his freedom. And this risk was also there, that the king might get annoyed and offended, because these kings are very used to instant obedience. Anything short of that is enough to get them into a rage. And he could have said that, why should I go investigating about them? And another factor, that all of them were wives of men of his government. So this would weaken his political image and power.